Hi, and welcome back to C. Myers Live. My name is Brian McHenry, and I'm a principal with C. Myers Corporation.
And my name is Adam Johnson, and I'm a principal with C. Myers Corporation.
Today, we're going to spend some time just talking through some of the major themes we're seeing in strategic planning sessions this year. I'll say one of the major takeaways so far is elevating some of the fundamentals and basics that they feel are going to help them going forward, and really making sure they have clarity and alignment and they're not missing anything due to the pace of the environment moving so rapidly.
And on that missing anything, I would echo that, Brian. What I've seen is just making sure that the executives and leadership teams, making sure they're getting that feedback from their teams on what are some of the opportunities that maybe they haven't discussed to the level of satisfaction of some, or what are some of the challenges, making sure they're getting all the key issues on the table as part of the process because they want to make sure they're not missing anything big.
Yeah, so let's talk about some of the themes in terms of missing anything big. One of the major discussions that's happening in planning sessions right now is really a discussion around growth. It's a really broad term when you say growth. A lot of this is coming from the feeling for many institutions is it's just a lot harder than it used to be. If you rewind 2 years ago in a much lower rate environment, deposits, loan growth, it didn't just happen by accident, but it was a lot easier for institutions to grow. Now it's much harder from a growth perspective as a result of rates and also the costs of growth as well. And so there's more focus from a KPIs perspective and measures of success perspective on what do we really want? What do we think makes sense going forward?
I've yet to work with an institution that said they didn't want to grow. I think we can universally accept that folks connect long-term growth with the ability to continue to provide products and services and pricing and so on, and also having the capacity to compensate employees. The question and the challenges and some of the conversations are as the growth levels are not matching what they had been, a couple years ago and a couple years before that. They're not matching the desired levels, if you will. How do they define success, and what are some of the implications of not growing quite as fast or having it to be harder to come by and more expensive to accomplish?
Part of the growth conversations as organizations are looking at it is they're also really trying to think from a scale perspective. So as they align around what growth do they want going forward, the cost of growth, they're also trying to really think through how to do it from a scale perspective, really meaning having the growth in assets, members, revenue, whatever they're thinking about, really outpace the growth in operating expenses. And that's another major theme that's coming up in planning sessions. Before we go there, though, that idea of scale, if we're going to need to be able to do a lot more with the same level of resources and potentially even fewer resources, but allocated in different ways.
Yeah, on that topic of growth and dovetails into that some expense considerations, continued recognition that it's not the time for many institutions. We're not hearing a lot of folks cutting expenses, but rather talking about that allocation of expenses. Are there some hard decisions that they should be making or need to make to reallocate, resources to higher impact areas? Before there's a true need to do so. So, in order to get that expense growth path in line with their revenue projections.
Yeah, and you mentioned projections. That's something that's playing a more significant role in the planning process. It's always been important to really align the desired financial performance with the strategy. What we're seeing in a lot of the planning sessions this year is actually on site in the session, pulling in the financial modeling to understand the different growth paths. If we go direction A versus direction B, what are the longer term financial impacts? Not just a budget, not just 1 year, but rather looking out 3, 4, 5 years on this is the trajectory that we're going and are we okay with this? It's also helping then in that case because things are getting harder by seeing the longer term financial path and some of the different financial scenarios, which can all be done pretty quickly in a meeting. It's helping because the decisions are getting harder. And if you can get ahead of it, it makes it that much easier to address the potential challenges down the road.
Yeah, I would concur seeing an uptick in leveraging some of the modeling to inform the discussions and put some to put some clarity around the urgency or not in some cases. One of the things, even though there's been a lot of discussion about the necessity for growth, the challenge of it coming slower, and some of the burden on expenses, there has also been, at least what I've seen, is some continued optimism about the role that people are, the role that there is optimism in the intermediate and longer term about some growth opportunities. It's the nearer term, the next year or so, and coming off of a year without, very high growth levels, that is getting a lot of focus.
Yeah. And on the optimism, then some of those conversations go into, while there's opportunity in the future, how do we start thinking about that today? And the definition of opportunities pretty wide ranging. Some of those conversations go towards going back on kind of that growth conversation. Where do mergers and inorganic growth fit into that? Things where we go out and we buy the loans or use fintechs to help us get the loans, as an example. And again, circling back to mergers, it's still coming up fairly frequently as a path for growth, broadly speaking. Yeah.
100% of sessions, people are talking about, the inorganic paths, the merger acquisition paths, what makes sense, where are they in that conversation. Again, this ongoing feeling of the urgency eventually for scale, also the inevitability of additional consolidation, and what's their role, what's their long-term growth path, and at what stage, if ever, does it make sense to consider proactively seeking a merger or an acquisition. We've seen some folks, especially if there's been some changes on the board or even leadership team, or it's just been a while since they've had this kind of conversation on growth, really an opportunity to get grounded on what's the purpose of the growth. And also what's the role of monitoring and looking at peers and their growth rates as well. People with different business models potentially. So lots of conversation amongst boards, between boards and leadership teams, on that purpose of growth, and talking that through and making sure that they're coming from a similar foundation, at least, or at least some principles and ideas on what the role of growth is, because of some of these challenges that are related to the growth discussion.
Yeah, those conversations have led to, I'll say, some good clarity and alignment at the board and the executive level, especially as things are changing going forward. If we're really clear on the purpose, it makes identifying the solutions a lot easier going forward.
Um, as far as harder decisions coming out of some of the growth discussions, is there anything that you've seen come up on a regular basis from hard decisions to be made?
Yeah, this goes back to we've touched on a little bit. It goes on the efficiency and the expense side. That's where more of the harder decisions are coming up, because what I'm hearing quite a bit is, think of it as a lot of the recurring ongoing expenses that institutions have. They are just getting more expensive, and they're taking up more of the dollars allocated for operating expenses. So you mentioned this is what I've seen too, is it's not that people are necessarily reducing the dollars of operating expenses. They may not be growing the dollars of operating expenses as much as they did previously, but a lot more of those dollars are being allocated towards things of compensation increases, insurance, and just some of the what keeps the business running, not as much as you would think on new products, new technology, and new people. And so that's where some of these harder decisions are coming in on, as we want to go down these directions and these paths. And we do think there's opportunity. How are we allocating our resources appropriately to take advantage of that?
Yeah. And also, I've seen in some groups this question of, are we thinking big enough? We don't need to make major shifts going into 2025, but are we stretching our brains and our thinking for what we really need to be positioned for 5 years down the road and 10 years down the road? And I've seen some folks get some value out of exercises such as, if we were to redo our entire talent pool at the institution, what would that look like? If we were going to redo our branch network, based on the way that they're set up and where they're set up, and how it's going to support our longer term path, or our allocation to the digital efforts and so on. How different would our ideal setup, if we could flip a switch today, be from the way that we're positioned now? And then if that's what we really think is ideal, what are some steps that we can take going forward?
Yeah. Yeah, that's a great practice to go through, the ideal versus where you are today, and then deciding what are the priorities from there.
So Brian, let me just kind of recap some of the things so far. We've got a lot of discussion around growth, which is a natural outcome from the growth being harder. Some harder decisions to be made on the expense allocation path. A bigger integration and some financial modeling into some of the discussions as a basis. What else
Mhm.
are you seeing?
Yeah, say two other themes that connect with all of these. So, as you mentioned, growth, thinking about expenses and sources of revenue. A lot more than is that, what are we doing to focus on our people that are going to help deliver on these things? And I'm going to say, in conjunction with that, is a lot more focus from an execution side of things. So on the people front, to start with, a lot of the conversations are shifting from really trying to acquire talent. That was certainly a big focus and a challenge for a number of years recently. The conversation is less so on that, while that can still be hard to do, but more so on how do we develop the talent that we have, and really trying to make sure that the talent has the skill sets and the competencies to deliver on the things that we want to deliver as an institution, and also continue to grow with what we're going to need 3, 4, 5 years in the future as an institution, so that that development is becoming a bigger component and a bigger focus for many institutions.
Uh, I would echo that, Brian. On the question of what's keeping you from getting even more strategic impact at your organization. You have not heard someone say just good ideas of things we want to do. It's almost
Yeah.
always our ability to get more done and more done well to move the business forward. We've got a lot of things we want to get done. We're not satisfied with our pace of getting them done. And when we peel back the onion on that one, some of it has to do with this, just the talent, the depth of talent to drive those changes. And of course, third parties and some other things as well play into it. But there's a lot of opportunity to get more things done and more effective things done for institutions.
Yeah, and one of the things we say in the planning sessions, I always like to take a vote. Anyone think things are going to be moving slower next year? And no one raises their hand. Everyone's on the other side. Things are going to continue to move faster. So having the talent and the ability to execute and continue to execute at a faster pace is becoming more critical. And I'll say, even in that, on the depth of talent you mentioned, there are some that on the execution side, they're looking at it and saying, we've gotten a lot done. We feel pretty good about what we've gotten done. However, the sustainability of the pace we just moved at over the last period of time, they're worried about their ability to continue that going forward. The over reliance on specific people to continue to get things done, rather than having greater skill sets and competency throughout the organization, piece of this execution component. And again, I'm going to punctuate this, especially as there's a feeling of we need to shorten the time to market from when we have ideas to realizing the benefits of our implementation. That's got to get faster and more effective.
Definitely. And I know we touched on this earlier, but I want to circle back. In a moment in time when financial performance may not be at the highest level, risk levels are elevated. In some circumstances, maybe this is the time to pull back. But what I'm seeing at least is the concern on strategic progress, the longer term relevancy outweighing the pressures and concerns on desired financial performance and elevated risk levels. This urgency to move forward, to be relevant long term, is way at the top of the list, and this ability to just get more things done is a big piece of it.
So we appreciate your time today. As always, feel free to reach out to us if you have any questions. Otherwise, we hope you have a great day.
And good luck in your sessions and your planning process.